Thank you, David, for being the first official appreciative interviewee of this Now What Appreciative Inquiry engagement.
It's
Yeah.
going to be strange, I think. Being English, I'm not very comfortable with being appreciated.
Well, it's mostly to get your appreciation. So I've already appreciated you before we started recording. Maybe
Right.
that'll happen too. But what we want to do, the purpose of this interview and the beginning phase of this whole process really is to get a sense of what's worked really well in Now What. I've been so pleased to see the number of people that were involved in the last edition showing up to want to keep working together and staying connected and looking towards the next edition and thinking about how it could develop and grow. And so that's actually the purpose of the inquiry is to create a collective container in which we can design the next edition of Now What, to build on what's worked well and to really start manifesting kind of all of our dreams for what's possible with it moving forward. And so the plan is to talk to lots of people who participated, starting with people who were kind of in the core of the collective, or you weren't officially part of the collective, but for all practical purposes you might as well be, and maybe you'll decide you want to be anyway. And then move out, sort of, including people that were on the periphery, and maybe some people who didn't participate at all, but who we would love to have be involved in the next edition, and who we think might have some related experiences. In their case, the interview wouldn't be about their Now What experience; it would be about other things they're familiar with that might inform the design of Now What. So that's our overall kind of purpose and plan here. And yeah, unless you have any questions, I think we can just dive in.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's dive in.
And I'm going to trust that Otter's recording will work well. So I may take a few notes on the side here. If you see me looking this way, it's not that I'm not listening. But maybe I'll switch to speaker view too. Yeah, so the starting point is a story of something specific that happened during the last edition of Now What, that you were a part of. That so a short story you want to tell me, something that you would consider just a really highly successful or peak experience, or something just that there was a lot of value or learning, that's something that really lit you up when it happened. So I'd love to hear a little story. If you want to pause for a minute, maybe it's obvious. No. If you want to take a minute to just sort of tune in, think what you want to focus on. That I always like doing that.
Yeah, I kind of like being spontaneous. So the first thing that sort of sprung to mind for me was because in this time of pandemic and being locked in, and Zoom fatigue and the way that calls are usually done and so forth, what struck me it was immediately kind of after the first sort of trying to get in touch and trying to understand all the different sort of processes and systems, because I dived in sort of more than halfway through, was the opening. So it was the experience of getting up physically really kind of early, and the going, the thing I think it was at night, wasn't it? With so it was the opening from New Zealand, right? I'm trying to remember
of Sonic Spring.
Yes, of Sonic Spring.
Right.
And it, because of the sort of the requirement of the strange hours, and the connection to this group of people doing a similar thing, but just literally the other side of the planet. It was very much like going to a kind of physical event, like going to an outdoor music festival or something like that. So I didn't feel like I was kind of trapped in my room here or at home. I felt this very kind of intimate and close connection. And at the same time, I didn't feel like glued to the screen. Like I had to just be staring or be interviewed or to think what I was saying. I could just kind of, it was a bit like getting up and, yeah, just looking at the sunset, you know? And that was the beginning. And then 2 or 3 times throughout it wasn't 24 hours, it was the 48 hours. And then the closing was very sort of similar. So it had this kind of like natural rhythm to the event, which was not just based on, I don't know, the electronics or the schedule of the program, but deeply kind of connected to the, you know, the earth, the way the sun and the way things traveled around that. And that plus the nature of the people in those calls, you know, sometimes larger groups of people, sometimes smaller groups of people, meant there was kind of and that's the other thing that kind of struck me a lot in terms of the story of those 48 hours was uh, being a Londoner and being involved in whatever stuff, making stuff, writing, technology, and all this stuff. There's lots of stuff, and there's lots of busyness, and there's lots of kind of pressure and sort of deadlines. And you know, if you're going to speak, you speak, and you keep speaking, and you're on stage or you're otherwise. And I had to really, because I could tell immediately, based on the culture of Now What, that it was very much emphasizing listening. So it was very pleasurably difficult to be as slow and as quiet in this kind of electronic space that I'm used to. So long pauses, and that also made me feel like I was outdoors, if you know what I mean. Like you might sit down on a park bench and someone start up a conversation, and then you pause and listen to the birds or the traffic past or something like that, and then there's another break in the conversation, and it had that kind of pace to it.
Right.
A lot of the time. And that kind of training, which was called it training, but I had to get out of a usual space that I might be in conversationally. um, um, was that's the story for me. It was a different conversational space to normal, in the real world, in the physical world, but almost closer to that than an online electronic kind of conference. It wasn't really an online Zoom conference. It was something that was happening in your kind of mind and your background throughout the 48 hours.
Mm.
And you could drop in and drop out, you know, in between your normal routine when you were eating. You know, you had to get up sometimes at some silly time, and you had to go to sleep at some other time. And obviously, because we were doing this kind of 48-hour sound piece, I was kind of present, even if not present, for that whole period. And that's what that's quite a rare feeling and experience for any form of event. And the closest I know of is doing these kind of 24-hour or more theatre performances. And that's what it felt like. It felt like a kind of theatre performance to me.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I love hearing those observations. The part about the rhythm, the quiet, sort of slower rhythm with pauses, that really struck me because it is such a contrast. I mean, the whole theme that I'm hearing is the contrast between the way we often experience, you know, Zoom calls and other types of virtual engagement versus what this felt like.
Mm.
And that's one, right, where Zoom, you know, like we did a family call, you know, a little family get together a few nights ago, and my wife's family, they just love to talk. You know, when I can't get a word in edgewise when we're sitting around the dinner table, right? And on Zoom, 8 people all trying to talk at once is just impossible, right? You don't even know if you're being heard or not.
Mm.
So what you're describing is so much the opposite of that, and I think that really stands out to me too. And other things I've heard from people, both the different quality of the space, the realness, the aliveness of the space, and the way that it didn't feel like we were engaging virtually. It had lots of these qualities of what you would associate with in-person type, you know, experiences, or it sort of imbued your life over those 48 hours. Yeah. Um, is there anything more you want to add to the story? We could move to the next question. That was certainly um, a lot to work with there. Are there any other sort of particular little details or elements, some kind of nugget of, a thing that this happened or this person said something or?
I guess the other part I would say is that, again, because I wasn't really, and that I think is an important element to it. So I wasn't present from the beginning of the 6-week period.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that I could kind of join in, like with a few days to go, and basically ended up with probably 4 or 5 new friends that were sort of continuing doing stuff in a very short period of time, and from very, very different backgrounds. So, and different countries, from from Norway, from America, from Africa, and that that ability to just sort of turn up and slot in is I was, using the Steve Jobs term, sort of magical. It was like how does that happen? Like, normally if you, I don't know, normally if you turn up to a dinner party or a concert or a talk, and you turn up 10 minutes before the end or 15 minutes before the end, you just feel not part of it in any way. So obviously, I was there for the full 48 hours and a bit before, but it's just the speed of being able to connect to completely strangers and other continents was something that struck me. So I'm basically talking to people from now, Claire, Ingametta, Carrie, and things like that. Each of them probably twice a day since Earth Day. So it's that is an extra dimension, but I think it is because of the first one, if you like.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you added that in, and how wonderful to hear that those connections that you made so quickly have also, proving durable and leading to new stuff. That's certainly, yeah, very gratifying to hear that.
Too much new stuff, possibly.
I know, right? Well, that's better than not having enough to do, probably. Um, yeah. All right. So the next part, there's 4 parts to the interview, by the way. So the second part is to think about sort of, and I think we've already started to identify some of this, specific elements, or they might be resources or assets, they might be other qualities, values, even, that contributed to this experience that you've just described. What was it that allowed it to be so valuable and satisfying and generative? If we could start sort of naming some of those particular elements, that gives us it's the goal coming out of this whole set of interviews is that we'll have this sense of what's called the positive core of what we have to work with. So it's a bit like asset mapping, I suppose, the related process. Yeah. So what comes to mind there? Values, resources, assets, elements.
So 2 things I would identify as the most important, and they're opposites. So the first was sort of your role in central coordination. So the fact that I could just drop into one of the calls, and then you could say, oh, you should talk to this person, or you should talk to that person. And on every occasion, that led to something, if you like, right? So if I was just on the site and then sort of browsing around, it would have taken me a lot longer. And more importantly, I wouldn't have felt like I'd got permission. It's funny, human beings that way. It's like, obviously the permission was there and the whole structure, but if someone says, oh, you should talk to so-and-so and makes that introduction, then that makes it so much easier to start. So that was one part of the structure. Without that facilitation and without one or more people kind of knowing everything that was going on, I don't think it would have been such a strong experience. And then the second part is kind of the opposite, which is the space and freedom. So the kind of open space nature of it meant that I just felt, yeah, I could do this at this time, or I could do that. So I felt that I had the permission, and not just the permission, but it was architected so that I did have that space. Like, and the combination of those two things gave me people to do stuff with, because I was introduced to them, and the space, the room to do it in. Yeah, those are the two bits of the architecture that comes to mind most. Obviously, there was a lot of work in terms of you know, the calendar, for instance, and all the different sort of spaces and the structure of the sort of planning meetings and the different colors. And that that's kind of like, I don't know what you call it, that's like invisible architecture, which without it probably nothing would work, and you can grumble about it and complain about it because it's never perfect, but it definitely without that architecture being designed to fit the purposes for these other more important things, like giving you space, allowing you to easily drop in and start a conversation with people that were talking about something that you were interested in. Without that architecture, it would just have been a lot of fragmented pieces. But it's sort of, it doesn't strike me sort of like in my like heart or sort of mind as much. It was just more like, you know, if you've got a building, you've got to have the foundation, you've got to have this stuff. But it's super important, and I know how much work it is to put that sort of stuff on and to learn those tools and to get to know them over a number of years and months, because they're continually changing and being updated. And it definitely strikes me that that needs to be resourced so much more, because it's also, that's something as you can pass on to other people and projects. You know, if we have that kind of toolkit available, that supports the core practice, then it just makes it possible for a group of kids in South America to do the same sort of thing.
Yep, in that gathering the wilds beyond the wilds of climate justice, they're using the team up calendar, in fact. And I think that's part of the vision of Now What in general too, is that it's a space where we can learn about all kinds of different tools. I mean, there's just so many of them out there, right? And so many of them designed for groups, and for groups to work together and collaborate. And it's rare to have a group that you can actually work with to just learn something and try it out and see what it can do, right? So I think I'm excited for the future with Now What. I'm jumping ahead to the dream phase in design, but I love that you named that. Many people have named that calendar too. It's just, and I still go back and just look at the Sonic Spring Day. It was such a delightful surprise what happened with the calendar. No, I'm supposed to be interviewing you, but I just want to share this because it feels so relevant. So the calendar has this thing. Basically, Team Up works where you can have, in the free version, up to 8 calendars that are all kind of interrelated. You know, it can show up. You can check how many of them you want to see at a time, and you can have many more in the paid version. Normally the default, I guess, is that a given event can only be part of one calendar, right? Which makes sense. would be confusing if it was part of two. But all of a sudden, when we did Sonic Spring, well, we had events that were part of Sonic Spring that were also part of, Now What in general, or something somebody was doing that had nothing to do with Now What, but we wanted to weave it into Sonic Spring. So I turned on the feature to let you put something into two separate calendars. And as a result, we got this insane Easter egg stripey thing going on. Right?
Yeah.
And I worked with the colors. I put a little thought into it, which colors look good together. I mean, here is our Sonic Spring journey with the pink and the yellow being the Sonic Spring colors, and the brown and the green and the blue being colors from other calendars. So I just get so happy when I look at that, right? And then you could go, what it also allowed us to do was to have in the Sonic Spring calendar just a separate view that was just Sonic Spring. We got to go back to. So here's just the pink and the yellow.
Yeah.
Right. I just, it's I don't know. It makes me happy. It's such a simple thing. I tried to use Google Calendar.
Yeah, I know.
And there was something it just wasn't doing well. I think it had to do with getting the time zones to show up easily in your own. I'm not sure exactly, but I'm so happy that I remembered I had used this like 3 years before and tracked it down.
Yeah, no, it's similar. It's the one that I chose last time as well. I think what it's good for is what you couldn't do with Google calendars. It just didn't work for events so well because the view, and I can't remember, but I just tried to use Google Calendar and it wouldn't work. And one of that weird things is, with 20 years of the internet, we still don't have a calendar works, and we still don't have an address book that works.
Right.
That's because these things don't make people money for whatever reason. It's not that people don't need them.
Yeah. Well, and there's turf wars over whose platform, I guess, and it all should be treated as a commons, right? As a public utility, not as private enterprise, if you ask me. Operating
100 calendars competing
engines.
to become a calendar that we can share events with is no way to create a shared calendar.
Yeah. But it's true. That's a nice sharing. It works really well in Team Up, and the way you can create just a page. You can take an event and it has its own URL just as a page for that event was really great. Any other things you want to name in terms of values or resources or assets?
And you mentioned it yourself, actually. So the value of experimentation, it doesn't have to all be kind of pre-produced and perfect. Just there's a new tool. I haven't tried it yet. Why don't we try it in a meeting on sort of like the afternoon and see how it goes? And that sort of thing is it does two things. One, it's a bit like the history of punk rock. It's like, okay, that doesn't look that hard. Even I can have a go at that. I can get on stage, and well, if you have all these very polished, amazing speakers and they're lit and recorded and teleprompted and translated, you just don't feel that you've got anything that could compete with that, or you feel you might be lowering the tone of the whole event. So when you have a strong emphasis on your ability to experiment, then and play with that, it just gets everyone talking and doing stuff rather than sitting around listening. And I'm sure there's several other things. The other thing I was good and it was strong, but I would have liked to see a bit more of is the kind of art input. So it wasn't just like talking heads, and it wasn't just I don't know, process and practice or something like that. There was the space and the ability to weave in, more like you would have in a music or a theatre festival. And I would have liked that part maybe double the volume or 3 times the volume. But
we'll get there with the next question. Yeah, I appreciate your naming that. By the way, did you ever watch the 14.5 minute harvest from the Sonic Spring Cafe, the World
Um,
Cafe?
no, I haven't done actually. I just started to watch it because you sent me the link, but yes, I don't think I have done that.
It starts slowly.
Yes,
You're
yes.
forgiven
I
for like,
saw
wait,
the kind of
what's
little
this?
bit of the. I saw the beginning with that kind of improvised musical thing. Yeah, and a lot of laughter.
Well, what you don't know when you see it is, I mean, and it goes sort of to the messy, let's try it thing, and also how I think sometimes in art, what doesn't work is part of what turns out to be
Yeah.
magical, or the mistakes. So at the beginning of that whole video, we're supposed to be seeing a screenshot of the Sonic Spring like banner, right? That beautiful
Yeah.
art that we have. And that was one of the nicest pieces of art, was just that image of Gaia's eyes, right? And so we're supposed to be seeing this and hearing the sound garden. And then the improvising we were doing was on top of the sound garden. But for some reason, the screen share was just black. So you see this empty space and this weird little thumbnail on the side. And I forgot to click the button to share my computer audio. So you're not hearing the sound garden either. So it's like, it was, the whole thing was not meant to look like that at all. And then
Yeah.
about 3 minutes in, you can see that we discover what had happened, and everybody's cracking up and pointing
Yeah.
fingers at me, which I just love. I just love, there's this whole drama, this arc to it. Plus, the thing begins and ends with this darkness in the images
Mm.
that, again, was not planned at all, but just
Yeah.
totally worked. It's probably 10 minutes too long and
Yeah.
whatever, but although some of that space that you talked about, the slowness of things, it has that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's one of my favorite sort of artistic moments, at least that I got to play in. And I agree, we could do much more of that. Some interview I am. Not the talking. Yeah, any more you want to say there, or shall we move on? I mean, the one thing, yeah, I mean, so I've heard, my role as a coordinator, um, eh, the the space and freedom that you had to just try things out, the tool, the sort of architecture and infrastructure, just with things like the calendar, um, the permission to experiment and try things and have it be messy and not perfect, and the encouragement for an artistic element, to have it be sort of more like a festival, not just all serious talking heads.
Yeah, I could say one other thing, which is absolutely not what English people should be invited into, was the other part that there was space for were people's feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So, like at times, someone got upset, or I don't know. They were just obviously. Because of the time we're in the pandemic, and because of the kind of, I don't know, just the overall situation, global situations and stuff like that, and then individuals connecting to other people in quite a deep way, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were times when people got emotions came out, and you normally wouldn't have that if you go to, I don't know, see a TED talk or something like that. I don't know what it is, but or even go to the theatre. You're not supposed to like cry in the audience, or at least not show it to other people. And usually quite a lot of important conversation and magic came out when that happened. So I don't like it because it's Californian, and I don't like it because of all sorts of other reasons, but it's important, and it's that makes the whole thing feel real as well. So it's yeah, I would say enabling that. I think it's quite difficult to do in a sort of cross-cultural way in some sense as well, but it did kind of it did that to an extent, and I think that relates to sort of art, I mean, obviously because of the community, there was quite a lot of, I think that comes because a lot of people are focused on healing and spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're very focused on that. They don't, you know, they don't want just a stream of ideas or things we can do and all of that.
Yeah.
Um, and getting that balance right is I think a really important part of the overall success. It's a bit like it kind of in Glastonbury Festival, you have the main stage and the rock bands on, but you also have the place where you can get really good food, or there's the little intimate sort of village. You need the mix of ingredients if it's gonna if
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna kind of work.
Mm-hmm. And my hearing when you talk about, you know, the people focus on art and healing and spirituality and not just on, you know, finding things to do, is that sort of a balance of the being and doing sort of dynamics? Is that
Yeah, I mean, and that's also tied up with me finding it quite difficult to listen, although I felt like I kind of managed it. I don't know why, uh, but you know, so I'm really at the moment in this time of me and what I'm doing with people, really focused on trying to do things
right?
and build things and that. And I then had to take this kind of 48 hours where it was like
Hmm.
not, you know, a lot of it was not about doing, it was about listening, or it was about giving some space to some emotion somewhere or something else. And yet without that, I wouldn't have made the relationships as quickly and as strongly to now be able to continue working with a group of people for the last 3 weeks or what have you. So yeah, it is about the tension of those things. And that's a mystery and a piece of magic. I don't know how you would formalize it.
Yeah, um, maybe that's not the question. Or I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking ahead now. Maybe that's a good prompt to go to the next question, which is about, you know, the imagining the next edition of Now What, and not sort of designing or formalizing it, but dreaming into it a bit. It's kind of so. Maybe we try it this way: that it's um, we're at the end of the next edition of Now What, so it's November of this year, sometime probably mid to late November, I'm guessing. We don't have the dates yet. And so we've just completed this time together. And it's been, you know, Now What has evolved. So we've had everything that we had this time, and all the things that might be possible that you wanted more of or that didn't happen, but you think, well, you know, what if that was also an element of it, right? So put yourself in this place of having just experienced, you know, Now What in this new iteration that's just so satisfying and successful and nourishing, and tell me about it. Tell me what happened. Tell me a story about
Okay.
what happened, you know, and with specifics like who was a part of it, and you know, what was the value you received, and
Okay.
what were you able to give, what was surprising, what did you do, if you want to, yeah,
Well, it's
sit for a minute with that and just sort of let the vision cook.
all right, but that's a dangerous question for me, I think, because it's just I spend so much time thinking about that, like from my own point of view, from my work, and like for 15 years, so I could go off on some weird journey which I don't want to. So I probably won't be able to help it. But the first thing that comes to sort of mind is, or two things. One is um, it would be exactly the same. A few things would be a little bit more beautiful.
Oh, wait, I want to just stop you for a second. You're speaking in the conditional tense, right? That is not the request. There's a bit of magic in this. This is
Okay.
the specific appreciative inquiry, technique, right? Put yourself into a
Okay.
future moment and speak from that future moment. This is what happened. Describe it as if it has happened.
Okay. So yeah, and it's just after the event, and one thing I loved was the connection to the first event. So I had the same kind of feeling. I felt the kind of history of it. It's like I went to that one, and I've gone to the second one, and I want to go to the third one. And it also had the same sort of positive qualities of kind of space. I met new people. I did some strange experiments, some that were a complete disaster, and some which.
Tell me about one.
Well, I did this kind of experiment. I actually sang, and I hate the recording of my sound of my own voice. And for some bizarre reason, these strange collection of musicians and other singers insisted that I start some vocal thing, and then it turned into something, and it was an experiment, and it's just like I would be like, I'm terrified of karaoke or anything like that. So this kind of weird thing kind of happened to me in that. The other thing that I really I got this sense of growth from the first one. So for instance, the music, when I turned up, it was like on the opening day, there was almost like this kind of, I don't know, choral kind of mad sound of all these people from that around the world making this just like amazing kind of like jam together. And it was I could really hear that, and I could dive into that sound. So and then it just kind of dispersed into all these little spaces and silences that I could kind of wander around. But the artistry and the performance on that. And the other thing that was really new is there were, throughout the sort of 48 hours, there were 2 or 3 just amazing performances. Like there was this Bovill theatre group that did this kind of improvised theatre piece with the audience.
A wall?
Yeah, Augusto Bovill. I'm kind of cheating because there's a community that I've worked with that practice in theatre before, and there was a worldwide meeting of Bovill theatre practitioners last weekend, and they had such energy. There were dancers and singers and very, very theatrical. So that was new. Yeah. It was a merger of those 2 communities. So rather than just the listening and the meditative and the thoughtful and the caring and about the planet people, there were also party people there, and that was one of the highlights of this weekend for me, is that it actually made me feel a bit like when I was like 18 and 19 and going to like the first outdoor festivals in Glastonbury before the wall came up, and I could hear amazing bands, but also weird experimental stuff, and people just playing guitars around campfires, and it made me feel flashback to kind of that, which kind of disappeared when music got more commercialized and clubs got more commercialized.
Are you talking about what happened in the next edition of Now What?
Yeah. So there were basically 2 or 3 of these performances that reminded me of like when I used to go to the early festivals that I would go to. And
by the way, can I ask you to or invite you to expand your vision, because you mentioned 48 hours, right?
Yeah.
Let's assume, because Now What as a gathering has been in a 6-week long flow, right? So we did the Sonic Spring this last one, but feel free to imagine a 6-week flow, not just a 48-hour experience.
Okay, so the way I pictured it, and if I'm to describe it as if it happened, like, so I came out of it, it was the same format, but it was different. So it was 6 weeks, but the 6 weeks were a rehearsal towards the 48-hour synthesis and performance at the end. Mm-hmm. So when I turned up, it was just a simple gathering. We just got to know each other. We kind of hung out. We split into random groups. We did various exercises. And then there was a whole series of stuff. And this stuff was designed to build up to the kind of weekend show and tell stroke performance at the end. Now, it didn't have to. Some of them you could just learn stuff. Some of them you could just hang out and do your own thing. But in general, there was much more sense of momentum towards like making something together. For instance, if you were having these conversations, there were, partly because of the kind of theatre and the arts people and the musicians and the video people turning up, they were kind of busy editing that together and feeding that back and saying, okay, well, how do we present that on the weekend at the end? So, for that reason, it was able to combine the feeling of space. There were lots of people just hanging out and they were kind of watching these busy bees doing weird things and having fun with it, but they didn't feel any compulsion to sort of show something on the weekend. They were just like, just a bit like Glastonbury, they were just hanging out around the campfires and doing their own thing, right? They never went to the main stage. But there were some other groups, and there were some artists and theatre groups and people who were really into it. It's not like a hackathon where they really needed to show their thing and get lots of people to sign up or what have you. But they had this beautiful focus on the overall community sort of event that they just wanted to show and reveal to everyone all the work that other people were doing and make that, present it in the best light, not like post-produce a video and put it on YouTube, but it was kind of performed live at the end of the weekend. So yes, the 48-hour performance was basically the show, and everything leading up, or a lot of what led up to it, was like rehearsals. And then the other thing I would say is that was different is there was an explicitly structured follow-up. So it wasn't just, it kind of emerged and happened, but the purpose in a way that if you view the whole event as a melody leading up to this kind of emotional climax at the end, that emotional climax gave people the energy, and there were structures in place for them to go and start making or start doing something and start building from the relationships they made. It might be simply towards the next one of those events, but it might be, oh, let's make this musical platform that we were working on much better. Or it might be, you know, that thing we fleshed out, that kind of improvised play that we did. Let's actually, let's start rehearsing that seriously and put that on. Or, and that was always understood for the first time to be an explicit part of the process. This is like your opportunity to meet other people, to play, to get together and form projects that you take forwards. And you don't have to do that, but it's just a given. It's just there. And if you are someone who is at a stage of your life, I don't know, you're a musician and you've just left college or something, and you don't have a band, you kind of know that you can meet it there and you can do something afterwards.
Yes, let's do it. It seems totally doable. Also, it's like it's a, you know, such a natural building on what's already, you know, there and what we've been practicing, and an extension of, in some ways, the original vision. Although the 48-hour thing, that was not in my design thinking ever in all of this. You know, I kind of envisioned the 6 weeks as an alternative to the 48 hours, like, you know, but the magical synergy of the two, and to have that be sort of this initial focus of collaborative energy, you know, over a period of weeks, building up to the 48 hours. And then, you know, that's just sort of like a training ground for then doing work out in the world and launching all these different projects, because you've built these relationships and you've tested things out and you've exposed people and they've seen stuff. And it's brilliant. I love it. Can you say there was something you said that was really sort of interesting, and I'd love to hear you expand on it more if you can. This idea that during the show, right, during the 48 hours, that there's a focus on highlighting the work of others and putting it in its best light.
Hmm.
Can you say more about what that might look like?
So
What kinds of groups, maybe even get specific with an example of one that happened? I forgot. It's already happened. Tell me about an example of that.
So one of the sort of examples, I'll describe it as if it happens. It's
Yeah.
actually partly to do with what we're kind of playing with and working on as well, is that there is one of the kind of performance groups that was organized from the coordinating team beforehand, but also as people turned up at the beginning of the 6 weeks, some people decided to join this group. It was like a group of troubadours. So they're like an evolution of what you called field recordings. But these were people who their job was to, go and drop in and take part in, let's say, the theatre workshops that were going on for this radio play that was going to be performed in 48 hours. And they would look at that, take that, and then they went over to the group where the musicians were jamming. And they got the idea that, in fact, those musicians could really work with that kind of radio group. So they arranged a kind of joint workshop, right? And so there was all this weaving together of the separate, sometimes spontaneous, self-organized, or sometimes pre-produced. And because on the 48 hours, the way it's staged, you get more staging if you're woven together with other people. The overall structure of it is about like, okay, I'm doing this, but it's not that I've just got this time slot that I do it. When I do this, I am taking some input or something from something else that happened in New Zealand, and I'm kind of responding to that. And then someone else is maybe taking that, and it's being filmed and recorded and treated and we've rehearsed it in a really good way, so that over those 48 hours, it's like, it's the 4th or 5th time I've done what I was looking to do. I've been through various evolutions and experiments with it, and I've got input from all sorts of different people. And so when I do it in that 48 hour kind of celebration, that kind of show and tell performance climax, I'm doing the best myself. I've improved, I've got better at it, but also other people are helping me because someone's helped me with the microphones and the sound recording. Someone else has sort of had some input to the text that was written. I've got new people to kind of collaborate with, and when we put that on together, it's stronger than any of the individual parts, because rather than me just getting up and talking, it's got a performative element which I might be too shy to do, or it's got a musical element.
Happened. This group of troubadours came together, they found new partners to play with, and they started working with the radio play folks and the theater folks and the musicians. And during the 48 hours, they produced what was the thing in the end that got produced in the 48 hours? It was this thing where they were grabbing sound and stuff that was happening real time and synthesizing it.
There are two things. They documented the 6 weeks, so that material was put on an archive, and there are all sorts of funny things that happened and interesting bits that happened, and they were kind of edited into the video, and they were mixed in various ways. And when I say video, it's not like one video, it's just it's happening in different places, and you can go and explore it. So you've got a kind of collage of all the great things, like in the closing circle last year. But this is now you've got a kind of professional group of people who all they were doing in the 6 weeks was just being nosy and curious and interviewing people and recording things. And they were like dressed up and they were funny characters, and they were really bringing the best out of people, right? And the other thing they did is they did what part of the thing that you did last year, which was you were really the sole person was saying, why don't you talk to so-and-so? But now there was a team of people that were very social and would get someone out of their shell and literally say, come with me, come and talk to so-and-so, right? So they did that. And then actually during the 48-hour performance, they were like traveling troubadours and clowns, breaking things up and taking bits of the audience and say, come and follow me, I'm going over there to that tent now, you know, and some people followed them.
So they weren't doing the performance during the 48 hours. They did a lot of connecting work to support it and to gather some of the raw material that got used in the radio play and things like that. And then they're documenting all of now what?
Sort of now, but I might be mapping it too closely to the physical event. But it's, for instance, you go to, I went yesterday to this talk, and the talk was about democracy, let's say. And it was very thoughtful, and then there were some workshops, but I was sort of getting, for whatever reason, a little bit itchy feet. And one of these troubadours came across me, right? And they're basically a comedian, and they started to crack some jokes about this talk, and then just say, why don't you come over here? There's a really good party around the corner and we can get drunk, right? So then I followed him, and he said, yeah, and he's drinking some wine. So I go to the kitchen and take out some wine. We just go on this hilarious trip through like 3 or 4 completely different spaces. And it's not on the calendar. It's not that, but because this guy knows the overall festival, the best places to go, and because he kind of knows me and this little group that he's gathered, and he says, those guys want to go and do this, or what have you. I had this really strange little tour across the series of events with this tribe.
Wonderful. Wow, I could stay in this
Oh, there's another thing that was very good.
Something else happened? Tell me more.
Well, obviously, because the times had changed, there were these physical spaces. So there were about, it wasn't, they were all quite small spaces, but this was like, there was this amazing space in the mountains in a village in Spain that people were taking part in. And they'd set up the speakers and the stage and like video projectors. The internet wasn't that good, but it didn't really matter, because the way that the technology was done is you could sort of like download over Wi-Fi the evening what happened was in New Zealand. You could project it there. You could meet people in the physical space there, interact, record that, and then send that off to be part of something that happened 2 hours later somewhere else. So you had this really good sound, really good images being projected. There wasn't any lags or bad quality stuff. And you were interacting with people in a real sort of physical setting. And what was super interesting is there were about 30 or 40 of those, and they were in such different settings, right? Some of them were in an urban setting, but a lot of them were like, just like a couple of people on a tent on the top of some mountain somewhere, and there was like 6 tents there, and I don't know, they were all like under 18 or something like that, and they had campfires, and they were using their mobile phones, but you really got this sense of what they were doing and what they were doing. And another was sort of, just there were just these different communities, and you got this sense of these physical gatherings, and you kind of wanted to be there, in fact, right? And I didn't have a chance to do that. I was still in my flat in London, but I also was able to connect to my local radio station here and this kind of youth centre. So there was a bit more of a connection to my local area than there was last time. And so in fact, during the 48 hours, and in fact, during the workshop, I managed to reach out to some of the people in the local community, and they came to my flat here, and we mixed some sounds, and we got involved. And then halfway through that, there was an actual event in the kind of canal cafe sort of place. It was like 2-3 hours, and I took a break into the physical world. But what was really interesting is the sound and was part of the Next Now What event, and what the live event that I went to see at that space was taking part in this 48-hour thing. So it was that physical connection to local communities, which was different, and obviously it wasn't possible at the last one. And there weren't so many of them because it takes quite a bit of rehearsing and quite a bit of organizing to get those physical spaces there. But there were like 20 or 30 of them, and they were quite small often. It wasn't a big deal, you know, just a bunch of people said, yeah, let's take part in Now What, but we're going camping, you know, and that was cool. Yeah.
Oh. Brilliant. Just brilliant. Now What has had a physical in-person dimension in the past, by the way. We didn't, for obvious reasons, that was challenging this last go around, but the previous two editions it did, in particularly relationship to conferences, although it wasn't limited to that. There were some of these smaller gatherings that you've described. And I think this vision, this dream of that being much more expansive, not that hard to do, and with the high quality connecting across those spaces that isn't relying on high bandwidth internet. Yes, yes, yes. All right. Well, the last question is, so we're still in this still next November. Now What has completed, and you're looking back to May and June of this year, and remembering some of the things that happened that set all this in motion, so that we were able to have this incredible, explosive evolution in the Now What gathering. What were some of the things that you did or realized, or who else got brought in, or just what were some of the steps that we took to get to where we got? Another way to look at it, you could have 3 wishes for the present moment. That's another version of this, but I kind of like this one.
I can only think of 2 at the moment, but I'm sure a third will come along, because 3 things always come along. So the 2 things that were the most important was, first of all, the amount of energy I got. So usually after an event, you burn out, and you're kind of, you've done your 48-hour thing, which is what we did with the radio or what have you, met lots of people, it got too much, been on Zoom too much, and you just sort of want to do something completely different, and you want 2-3 months off. But that didn't happen. In fact, it was quite relaxing. It felt quite relaxing, that Now What event, and it just started to slowly build from there. So I had a surprising amount of energy because of the people that I met, and because we started to take turns in doing things, to steadily work towards getting better and better at doing this till the November thing, right? And so that was really important. What happened in May, June, that there was this kind of immediate growing sense of energy and follow-up, but probably much, much more important than that, and something that I'd always wanted for 15-20 years, I've always wanted, was that something unique happened, which is instead of Now What just being like one person, let's say Ben Roberts' baby, right? There became a partnership of about 3 or 4 similar sort of events, and they decided to team up. and they decided to work together, and they decided to drop their kind of particular perspectives, because within this architecture they could all do their own thing in their own space. And that sense of just having a few more resources, a few more people doing the organizing, and being able to take 2 or 3 weeks off and yet come back and get involved. And the other amazing thing that happened because of that, and that also required a legal structure, it required a formal partnership, is we managed to apply for some money to do this and actually resource it properly for the first time, right? And in fact, all the money I think went to actual projects out of that first Now What. So we still were nearly broke, but I didn't care. We put on this amazing event, and we were able to do it because we managed to create a structure that allowed other groups that were very serious about doing this sort of thing to work together, instead of everyone competing to do their own little Now What's all over the place. And that really made my heart sing. So, for instance, the group from the Augusta Bovill and the Paolo Ferreri thing, they were thinking about making some international structure and doing their own event, but they decided to join forces, right? And like Melanie St. James's Global Summit, she was completely burnt out after that, but she decided to bring her community into it. And now we had an extra 20, 30 countries with people being involved. And together we applied for some funding, and we got some funding from, the Earth Fund to put on this event. And we got the right infrastructure now to be able to do justice to all the gatherings and the meetings that happen. And it only happened because we managed to work together in a legal way. So we got our internal governance sorted.
Right.
And that governance was just like the Now What event. It was welcoming to other groups to join. And they could come and join, and they could leave, and they could take that learning into their own projects, but they didn't feel that they had to join some big collective. They could join with their group identity, do their own thing, and the overall structure just encouraged groups to work together, and individuals and groups to work together, and individuals to move from group to group and stuff like that. And that was just a breath of fresh air to those groups, which were used to just struggling to do their own thing within their own limited resources. Right. And now they could all kind of just put this thing on together. It was less work, more fun, better resourced, and they kept the kind of community organic feel, because they didn't just adopt a 5013C charity with the board. They had a completely new living governance structure, which was designed to reflect the values of Now What, not just, oh my God, we need a bank account and some sort of legal entity. This was actually just well, I call it lifelike governance. It was a structure within which people could breathe, play, collaborate, come and go, but it was a structure. It had the ability, dispute resolution, playfulness, ability to budget, ability to make hard decisions about where money does go and doesn't go. And at the same time, we could tell the whole world about that. And instead of people going, oh, so they got money and they didn't, or whatever sort of thing, they went, wow, you can actually organize something like that. And so it wasn't quite everything I wanted it to be, but it was the first time I'd ever seen 2 or 3 groups that would normally compete come together and work together.
So the legal structure, the funding, a way for multiple groups to collaborate, maintaining their own identity, but having a governance structure that let them work together at the same time, that was not, that was alive, that was playful, but also could do all the nuts and bolts things that needed to be done, especially when you're working with money.
And sometimes it wasn't as efficient as it might be if you were just in like one organization, but it had this beautiful improvised. It was efficient in terms of its beauty and its lifelikeness and its improvisational ability. I wouldn't necessarily produce a film that way,
Right.
but I would produce a glorious celebratory collective participatory festival that way anytime. Is
Right.
the best structure for that.
Right. Right. Right.
Or at least it's getting towards a better one than we currently have.
Yeah.
And I also wish, I'm very grateful for the fact that the weather was good in November. Had amazing snow where it was supposed to snow, great sunsets. It didn't just rain all the time. Oh, and another thing that was different, I remember now, people swapped continents. So some of the people that were in New Zealand came to London, and I had the opportunity to go to like Canada, and someone from Canada, some of the organizers actually just because of the requirement to weave, and just because it was fun, they had 3 or 4 people who were embedded in there, you know, we got a chance to actually swap places and spaces, yeah, and that was really, really interesting because like when Melanie, who was in like Tokyo, came to London, she stayed in my place and she got to know all the connections and the people that I normally work with, and I went to like
You went to Tokyo.
I know I went to Brazil actually.
Oh, you went to Brazil.
And I haven't been there for a long time. And although I'd met some of the people on Zoom at the earlier Now What, and also from the Bovill community, actually going there and staying there for like, I think nearly 3 months, because it didn't cost any more. In fact, it probably saved me money because I was in Brazil rather than London, and I was staying in someone's house in Brazil. And 4 or 5 of us just took a bit of an opportunity to swap where our bases were, and that really helped the social coordination and organization, and was fun.
Yeah, fascinating. Fascinating.
Actually, I realized I didn't go to Brazil. I wanted to go to Brazil. But
your memory's getting a little foggy in your old age.
Yeah, because of just like obligations and being older and family and stuff like that. And what happened is I was going to go there, but instead this like 24-year-old project manager, she was from the local community here, and she got super involved. And I said, look, I can't go. Would you like to go? And she went there instead. It was for like, what was super nice about that, it was a real like transformatory experience for her, you know. She didn't just go on holiday somewhere. She worked on this fantastic event, lived in this like community in Brazil, got to know the thinkers, the activists, the writers, and also just helped glue that thing together. So she connected like 4 radio stations in Brazil to the one here in Finsbury Park and in London and in Bristol. And without her going there, that would never have happened.
I love those young digital nomads.
Yeah. Funny thing is, she wasn't actually digital. She was just good with people, and she knew the local community here. And when she saw that we were doing this kind of participatory thing, and I went to talk to the radio station, they said, "Well, there's so and so. She's a really good organizer and producer." I mean, she was actually initially, I mean, she didn't even use mobile phones. She was against Facebook and all this stuff. So she was totally, I mean, obviously she was smart and everything, and she realized that she needed to communicate. And she fell in love, for instance, with the whole open source radio stuff. Yeah, but she wasn't, it wasn't she did have to get a mobile, I must admit.
Yeah, we all have to compromise a little bit. Yeah, I'm sure she felt bad about the conflict minerals that were contained in it.
I think she forgot about that. She just had such a good time.
Until I reminded her and made her feel guilty.
Yes, and then you made her feel terrible afterwards.
But then we did that beautiful ceremony with Shulamith where we honored the struggle and the pain that led to our having this technological capacity.
Yeah.
And it didn't make it. I don't know. I'm not sure what else we did other than feel like at least we were naming it. Was there some way we actually helped things shift in the world? Maybe we found some. Oh yeah, we found that initiative that was recycling that was rapidly increasing our capacity to recycle the rare earth
Yeah,
metals.
but that's what was amazing about November's event. So that feeling got channeled into action.
Yeah.
So basically, partly through, by the way, the governance structure that we set up, we had connections now with people like, funding agencies and the city in Kinshasa, for instance. There was an educational project there, and we had a relationship with them, and there were some follow-on sort of education courses. And out of those connections and what we did, there was an opportunity to channel some of the kind of waste and recycling issues, and that helped several organizations in terms of um, uh, the work that they were doing, connecting to communities, because now they could connect. Some of the infrastructure that we set up for that event was super useful to these kind of not-for-profits and their own projects, because the radio didn't just go off at the end of that. The conversation platforms didn't just get switched off. They were now, they kind of, what was nice about it was this kind of seasonal look to the website. So it sort of changed throughout the season. And when it came to sort of like the November event, it was very autumnal and sort of like what have you. But just immediately in the new year and going to spring, it became project focused, and it sort of supported these particular things and projects and initiatives that were sort of created out of
Well,
the
there
November.
was that rebel cohort in New Zealand that said, you know what, we're going to do Sonic Spring in November. Enough of this northern dominance of our
Yeah,
mindsets. So we had both.
yeah, and that's the other thing that was weird. Just just getting to know a bit more about how the world spins and where the sun lands and how that stuff works. Because my dyslexic brain doesn't quite compute it all automatically. I can never quite.
I can't believe that I figured out for the first time that it takes 48 hours for a calendar day to elapse.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, that should be obvious to all of us, but somehow it was a revelation. Or that Midway Island is one of the last places where a day happens.
Yeah.
That was significant. Do you know Chris Jordan's work?
No.
No? No. That factored into the Sonic Spring piece that I was referring to before, the recording that we did. And it came out of the grief altar that immediately preceded that, while you were busy in your 5.5 hours of open space, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's an amazing artist, Chris Jordan, based in the Pacific Northwest. He's done a lot of work with Joanna Macy, if you're familiar with her, the work that reconnects. His specialty is kind of making visible through his art, which is often photography, although he then made a film, the consumer society, the amount of waste. He did a lot of stuff with plastic bottles and light bulbs and things like that. And then he heard about how the plastic from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch was washing up on Midway Island, where there's a large colony of albatross, and it was killing the birds because they were feeding the plastic to their chicks, and it blocked their digestive tracts. And he went out there to film this, or not to film it, to take pictures of the birds. He went during the off season initially when the colony was not there, and just went to the carcasses and took some very famous pictures of he would dissect a bird and display all the plastic that was inside of it, make these mandalas and altars and things. Then he winds up going back when the birds are there, and falls in love with them and makes a film. It's an amazing film called Albatross. It was originally called Midway, and I tried to collaborate with him back when it was first going to be taking place in like 2017 or 2016. Maybe it was going to premiere at Sundance, but he got stuck with the film, and we had communications challenges too, even though I had a core group that had good connections. So anyway, it took him like a couple of years and a couple of different edits, and he had to change all the music. The first version just wrecked people. I think that was like, he had the film done and he just felt like he couldn't show it to people because it just left them, completely destroyed. And so he had to kind of go back and rethink it, I guess. Anyway, it's an amazing film. I think it's up for free on Vimeo, Albatross. And that showed up because of Midway, because of the timing of Midway, that got mentioned in things in the process. And so it showed up in those two different calls on Sonic Spring. And it turned out that not only did I know about this film and it's gone to one of the premieres of it, but Liza Simone in LA, did you encounter her at all?
Yeah.
Now What Journeys? She's the one that brought Carrie in.
Yeah.
She's like an Uber connector. Delightful. In fact, I'm noticing we haven't seen her. Some of the collective calls, I have to reach out to her. She knew him too, and had done an exhibit, I guess, because she does these pop-up things in empty storefronts. That's her deal, is pop-up art exhibits in empty storefronts around LA. And she'd done one with some of his work. Anyway, that's a story. Well,
cool.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you so much. This was, I've done these, I don't know if I've done 100 of them, but I've certainly done more than 50 appreciative interviews in the past in different contexts. We did just one in Now What last time of Naomi Joy Smith. Did you cross paths with her at all?
Maybe I can't, not good at putting names and faces together.
It's not. They are a young person from New Zealand, back there now with their parents, but kind of, to me, the prototypical digital nomad. When I first met Naomi, she was in Berlin, and then she was in Stockholm for a while. And keep saying she. Sorry, Naomi, if you're watching this, I'm trying. Anyway, delightful, creative person, and a couple of us in the last, not this edition, but the one in May and June, got the idea to interview Naomi, and there's a recording of it. But I don't know, I'm just really lit up by what we just did. I mean, obviously you are a unique and brilliant person, and I can't imagine anyone with whom it would be more fun to do what we just did than you. And the process just works. And so I'm really excited now, having done one, to share this recording and this transcript and start interviewing lots more people and energize the whole collective that wants to do this. Because there's a good, I don't know, at least 10, if not 20 of us already that want to go out and do these interviews and see what we get back, from all of that. And then have that raw material to work with to start focusing our collective dreaming and design work to go. I mean, I'm tingling with the sense of possibility that just this one interview has set up. It's like I forgot how good this process can be.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So I'd be really interested, as well as how to visualize the kind of mapping together of those. So I'll think about that.
Yeah, we need some good software. We started playing with Mural at the end of Now What. Well, you saw that.
Yeah.
I suddenly realized when we were doing Sonic Spring, we needed a design tool, and that might be one to try. There's something called Miro that might be an open source version of that.
It's not.
Other folks are using.
It's not open source. It's very good. It seems to be the best one at the moment. Miro.
Miro, you like Miro?
People that I know working in that sort of space, and we can also program with it. It's got a strong API.
Is that right?
Yeah, I'm very much into how you visualize those maps and the tools that you would work with and what have you. So and because these are long form videos with a structure, and because of the kind of content that can reach out and overlap with others, I think I'd be really interested in talking later or working out how we could archive those and link them, because that's what we're working on now, this kind of interactive documentary with archived footage. And
yeah, Kumu can do some kind of, obviously it's a mapping tool that can be not just,
yes.
network maps of people and organizations, but you can also do maps of ideas and systems and things like that with it.
And I think Kumu's great.
Expensive, so even if it's good, that is a downside with it. I think if you limited with how many people can collaborate on the free version. Although maybe it's just that it has to be public. Anyway, all right. Well, to be continued, my friend. Any other closing thoughts?
No, I've got to have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
A closing thought. Yeah, closing thought. There is no closing. It's an opening. Yeah.
Very much so. All right. Well.
So thanks for reaching out. It's been great. And please keep me in touch with the other ones that you do. And let's just let's do the next thing.